I have heard of a land on a faraway strand. In the Bible, the story is told, where cares never come, never darkness nor gloom, and nothing shall ever.
We're in chapter 45. We'll be picking up in verse 9. Just a moment. Joseph, as we've seen over the last few weeks, is now a high-ranking official in Egypt, and that's kind of an understatement to say he's a high-ranking official. He's actually the highest-ranked official in Egypt. The only person that is above him is Pharaoh himself. This time his brothers have come to seek help again. He tests his brothers by placing his cup in Benjamin's sack. And they leave. The discovery of the cup in Benjamin's sack leads to a plea from Judah, where he offered himself in Benjamin's place, because the contingency was, okay, whoever I find, because he went to him and said, you've stole my cup. They all say, no, we didn't. He says, okay, whoever sack I find it in comes back with me. It was found in Benjamin's. Judah says, look, take me instead, which is a contrast. It's supposed to make us compare their attitude toward that situation and their attitude that they had toward Joseph when Joseph was young. What did they do with Joseph? They sold him into slavery. Now Benjamin is about to be pulled into Egypt into slavery, and Judah says, let me go in his place. You should already begin to pick up messianic themes. Joseph then ultimately reveals his identity, offers forgiveness to his brothers. And so what we see even up to this point in this story is the emphasizing of the messianic themes of sacrifice, of forgiveness, of reconciliation, because he reconciles with his brothers, of mercy, because he showed mercy to his brothers, asked nothing from them, didn't find fault with them in any way. In fact, he comforted them. So the theme of mercy, and then ultimately of salvation, which is what's going on in the whole story. And again, and we talked about this a little bit last time, this all dates back to the dreams that he had as a child. And so all of this stuff is going on. All of this stuff should be pulled back into our mind as we're reading these things unfold, or reading these things. The story is unfolding, which is not only fulfilling those prophesied dreams that he had, but also prophesying about what God is doing to fulfill his promise to Abraham, which is really the theme of the entire book of Genesis once it's uttered. That promise is actually first offered way back in chapter 3 in a skeletal form, that through the seed of woman everyone would be blessed, back in chapter 3, that he would bruise the head of the serpent. So that's where we get the first little picture, and then it's fleshed out some with Abraham. It's actually developed some over the life of Abraham, then given to Isaac, then given to Jacob, who becomes Israel. Then we're going to see it fulfilled in Judah. And there's been a couple of things in Judah's life. First off, Judah was the brother who wasn't in support of killing Joseph. And then Judah, though he did a terrible thing with Tamar, was very penitent over it. And now we see Judah offering himself in the place of his younger brother as a sacrifice, if you will. He's sacrificing his life for Benjamin's. And so all of that is foreshadowing what's going to happen through Judah's lineage down the road. So all of that is at play. Now, we pick up the story here. He has explained in verse 8, it was not you who sent me here, but God. Now, obviously, God didn't make them do what they did. And it's also important to say that they didn't send him to Egypt. They sold him to some Ishmaelite, Bedouin, gypsy, caravan people. They sold him to Potiphar. Potiphar put him in jail. 2 years later, he then goes to Egypt, and he's been ruling in Egypt now for how long? There is going to be a time marker in tonight's lesson, so we'll and I don't remember exactly what it is right off the top of my head right now. As many times as I've looked at it.
2 years, because in verse 6, it says the famine's been in the land 2 years.
Which means it's been at least
7 years, right?
9 years. That's right, because the 7 years of plenty have already happened. We're into the famine at this point, so he's been in Egypt for 9 years. His brothers don't recognize him. Why don't they recognize him? He's older, and he's now Egyptian. He is ruling in Egypt, so guess what he wears? The Egyptian regalia. He probably had his head shaved like the Egyptians did. He probably wore eye makeup like the Egyptians did. He definitely wore all of the ruling class garb that the Egyptians did. He was married to an Egyptian woman, and he spoke more than likely Egyptian. So at this point, they don't know that he's even alive. They certainly aren't expecting to run into him in Egypt. They are definitely not expecting to run into him as the ruler of Egypt. And so there's no reason for them to think that they're dealing with Joseph. Although there's the nagging question of how he knows so much about our family to ask all these really, really pointed questions. You'll remember when he went back the first time, the father was like, well, why didn't you even tell him you had a brother? Well, because he asked specifically about it. So there's these nagging questions about how he has so much information, but they don't know who it is. So he reveals himself to them and then says, don't worry about it. Despite the fact that you meant this evil for me, God has caused it to be good. God's brought me here so that I can deliver you. So he says, hurry up and go to my father and say to him, thus says your son Joseph. Now see, that's a significant statement in and of itself, because what does his father believe? That Joseph is dead. What an announcement after all this time for them to come back and say, hey, Joseph has said. So he said, go back and you say that your son Joseph has said, you shall come down to me, do not delay. You shall live in the land of Goshen. You shall be near me and you and your children and your children's children. So this is all that's happening and developing. We've got kids and grandkids and your children and your children's children and your flocks and your herds and all that you have. There I will also provide for you. Now there's that messianic theme. I will provide for you. Who provides? God provides. I will provide for you, for there are still 5 years of famine to come, lest you and your household and all that you have been impoverished. Behold, your eyes see, and the eyes of my brother Benjamin see, that it is my mouth which is speaking to you. Now you must tell my father of all my splendor in Egypt, and all that you have seen, and you must hurry and bring my father down here. Then he fell on his brother Benjamin's neck and wept, and Benjamin wept on his neck. And he kissed all of his brothers and wept on them. And afterwards his brothers talked with him. So we have a complete reconciliation at this point. We have signs of affection. We have them talking with one another. This is important. This is important, and it's easy to look past if you don't really get it. And it's going to show up much later. So I have to talk about it now, or it'll get forgotten about. When their father dies, all of these brothers immediately are afraid of what? Joseph's going to get back at him now. So this is even more foreshadowing. Joseph is the one that's shown mercy. Joseph is the one that's saying, don't worry about it. Joseph is the one that's hugging them and kissing them and receiving them. And they still don't quite trust him. When he's not done anything to them but good, and they have done evil to him, he receives them fully, they're guarded. Again, the overtones of our relationship with God. God doesn't do anything to harm us. He does everything to protect and provide for us. And then we do what? We question God. And so we have this reinforcement. Well, yes, that is certainly how we would express it. So anyway, after all this, when the news was heard in Pharaoh's house that Joseph's brothers had come. So now we're switching. We're not talking about Joseph anymore. We're talking now about Joseph's friend, Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And when it's heard in his house that Joseph's brothers come, it pleased Pharaoh and his servants. Now this shows you just how generous and how much respect Pharaoh had for Joseph. And we're going to see that develop even more in the next verses. But what do we tend to do? Okay, let's present it like this. All right, so you invite someone to come live in your house. And he lives in your house and helps manage and run your house for you. And then one day, his 11 brothers show up. And he's giving them food and not taking money from them. And then he says, hey, y'all all go home. You get your families, you get all your stuff, you pick up dad, and come back here and live with me. And you get home and you get word that this person's family has shown up and they've been invited to come live in your house. How do you react? Yeah, I'm going to be honest. I'm going to say, listen, I didn't invite your family to come live here. I can't deal with that. I invited you to come. That is not Pharaoh's reaction. See, after World War II, the United States invited certain individuals from Europe to move over to the United States and to live here and to work here and to become American citizens. What would we do if the entire nation of Germany had come over, for instance? What would we have said as a nation? No, that's what we'd have said. Yeah. It's okay that Einstein came over. It's okay that von Buren came over. They can do something for us and help us and contribute, but we don't want all the rest of those people. We didn't sign up for that. That is not how Pharaoh reacts at all. He's apparently thrilled. Yes.
Another, I guess, version of you might kind of put yourself in the state.
Right.
work who has been separated from their family for however many years, right? And then one day they come into work and they say, hey, I just reconciled with my brothers and I've invited them to come live with me. And you're good friends with, you're an employee, you're good
Right.
friends with that employee, then you would probably have more like favorite reaction of like, that's great, that sounds great for you, that sounds great for your life.
Except for this.
They work in our company too.
Right.
Right. What can I do to help?
Except for the next statement. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, say to your brothers, do this. Load your beast and go to the land of Canaan and take your father and your households and come to me, and I'll give you the best land of Egypt, and you shall eat the fat of the land. Now you are ordered. Do this. Take wagons from the land of Egypt for your little ones, for your wives. Bring your father and come. Do not concern yourself with your goods. For the best of all the land of Egypt is yours. In other words, go back and pick up the people and come back, but you can leave everything you own there, because when you get here, the very best of what I have to offer is yours for free. This is a huge statement about the way that Pharaoh felt toward Joseph, about how important Joseph was viewed to Egypt. That also becomes an extremely important part of the story later, much later, when a Pharaoh arises that knew not Joseph. And what happened to Joseph's descendants? They were made slaves. Okay, so this is, look, we're talking about a generation. We're talking about how quickly somebody who is literally the most well-known, well-liked individual in Egypt is forgotten about. And I would submit to you that that is at least in part what James is talking about when he says your life is but a vapor that vanishes away. We usually talk about that in terms of the duration of our life, but there's more to it than that. The more significant part of it is the things that we do on this earth, no matter how great they may be, they vanish. I don't care how important you are to the organization you work for. There is a day coming when someone else will be sitting in your office doing your job. And in a relatively short period of time, nobody there will know who you are. Interestingly enough, you may be so important that there's a picture of you on the wall. They still won't know who you are. That's just life. But you know what? God doesn't forget about us like that. I will never leave you or forsake you. Lo, I am with you always, even till the end of the age. And there's a contrast. So here this world leader is very generous to them, but it is connected to that individual and to what you can do for that individual. And when those things go away, so does those blessings. That never happens with God. And despite the fact that there are 400 years of slavery sandwiched in between these two events, when they leave Egypt, you know what they do? They take the wealth of Egypt with them. God never forsook them, even while they were slaves. He hadn't forgot about them. He hadn't stopped his work to deliver them. It was still part of the plan being carried out, despite the fact that it was 400 years of really bad days. And if we carry this, by the way, we're getting close to the end of the book, so we need to start talking about that. If we carry this study into the book of Exodus, when the Moses story starts getting told, when Moses first shows up on the scene and says, God has sent me to deliver you, you do realize that the first thing that happens is life gets harder for them, not better. God working for you doesn't always make your life easy, and it doesn't always remove your trouble, and it doesn't always take you out of the situation immediately. Well, Right, but that's on the other side of delivering them. When Moses first showed up, he went to Pharaoh like he was told to do, and he said, "Let my people go." And Pharaoh said, "You guys are just lazy, and so not only am I not going to let you go, but I'm going to demand that you work harder because you've got too much time on your hands. That's why you're asking to go and worship your God. You've got too much time on your hands, obviously. So now you need to produce twice as many bricks." And then when it happened again, he says, "Look, clearly you still have too much time on your hands. So not only am I not going to lighten your load any, but now you got to do it, and I'm not even going to give you straw to do it. You've got to go gather the straw too." And all of that is God's deliverance. Moses has just showed up, and all of a sudden their life is 3 times as bad. And that's part of what led to the questioning and the grumbling and the worry down the road. And all of that is stuff that we're supposed to learn from so that we do not grow weary in well-doing, so that we do not faint when we are tested, so that we don't think that God isn't there providing for us just because the day isn't good. Those days were not good, but God was still there. He was still delivering them. And in the Moses story, he was actively delivering them because before Moses ever went, he had actually told Moses, "Look, you're going to go down there and you're going to do this, but he's not going to let you go. I'm eventually going to deliver you by a hard hand and get you out. But it's not going to happen immediately." And yet, what do we want? When we want to be delivered from something, we want to be delivered from it now. And so when I'm praying about my sick mother, I want her to be healed. And I want all of her strength to be around. And I want her to live and to live for a long time. And sometimes it doesn't work out that way. Sometimes what happens? They pass away. Now the question is, do I believe that God is still there listening to my prayer and answering me? Or do I question God and question his faithfulness? And the point of reading stories like this is to help us understand that God is there, that God is watching, that God is listening, that God is still working to deliver, and he's still doing what is needed to provide for you, but sometimes the process is slow and arduous and difficult. Joseph in prison for 2 years. God hadn't forsaken him. The children of Israel in bondage for 400 years. God hadn't forsaken them. The things getting more difficult at the Exodus time. God hadn't forsaken them. He was still at work. He was actively at work during that time. Things that they even saw with the plagues and all the other things. And yet, still on the other side of the sea, now they've just walked across the sea on dry ground. The water closes on the Egyptian army behind them. Moses goes up on the mountain to meet with God, and in 40 days, they've given up on God and built a calf and started worshiping it. Despite the fact of all that stuff that they witnessed. And start saying, "This is the God that delivered us out of Egypt." So, we need to pick up on all these things because those are the lessons we're supposed to be learning. Joseph ultimately is saying to them in this chapter, look, all of this time and all of those things that happened, that was God delivering us. It just didn't look like it for a long time. And so Pharaoh has been very gracious. And again, it shows you just how much love and respect Pharaoh had for Joseph to offer these things. Look, don't even, I'm going to give you carts from right here to go down, and I want you to pick every person up, but you don't need to take any of your possessions. Leave your clothes, leave your food, leave your implements, leave everything else behind. You don't have to load any of that. You can just walk away from it. Leave your tents, all of it. Just bring the people and the animals, and I'm going to give you the very best that Egypt has to offer. Well, that's yeah, correct. And he knows that Joseph has God on his side. Now, does he worship the God of Joseph? No. But does he believe in the God of Joseph? Yeah. Why? Because Joseph was able to do something that his magicians couldn't do, which was interpret the dream, and even more than that, do what? Plan and make provision for the future. And we either just lost the camera or it just came back on. I don't know which one.
Egypt supposedly was east of the Nile River.
Yeah, and what I'll say about that is what I'm persuaded about is two things pertaining to that, and it's based on the text here. I was just thinking about that as I was studying and preparing for tonight. There's two things that stick out. We're going to get to it in a minute as we keep reading. First off, they don't like herdsmen in Egypt. So he's convinced that they'll let them go to Goshen because of their livestock, which tells me that that's not an area that was inhabited a great deal. But apparently it was really, really good for raising livestock. And so that is why he's honing in on Goshen. We also see the wisdom of Joseph at play here as this plays out, because he actually warns a couple of us as they come in, hey, this is how I want, when he asks you this question, I want you to answer this way. If you answer this way, we'll get what we want. And so there's some wisdom that he is able to share with them along those lines. And so all that's going on, but the important thing is that they're getting everything that they need. That's the point that's being made. Everything that they need is being supplied to them from somebody else. And who is that? Again, God is not making Pharaoh do this, but God is still the one that's giving the gifts through Pharaoh. That's an important thing to learn as well. When something good that is needed is provided for you, ultimately, where is that gift coming from? God. Now, he may not be making it happen, but he's using the circumstances to give you what you need. And that's what we see developing here. By the way, I would submit to you that even the 400 years of slavery was God doing that very thing. Because difficult times and persecution happens for a purpose as well. Not just the good things. We like to talk about the good things. We certainly don't look at the bad things and say, thank you, God, for giving me this hardship. But maybe we ought to. Go back and read James chapter 1. Go back and read Hebrews 2. It talks about the fact that Christ was perfected through suffering. Read this story and see the role that suffering plays. The suffering of Judah has moved Judah from being less than good to being sacrificial with his life. That is the same thing that ought to happen with us. As we live, we should more and more reflect the image of God by learning and growing and maturing. And so that's what we have going on here. He sent his brothers and they departed, said, do not quarrel on the journey. Well, actually, I skipped a couple of verses, didn't I? So he gave changes of garments, or he gave them provision for his journeys. Change of garments, verse 22. But to Benjamin, he gave 300 pieces of silver. and 5 changes of garments. So again, Benjamin's getting just a little bit bigger share. To his father he sent as follows: 10 donkeys loaded with the best things of Egypt, 10 female donkeys loaded with grain and bread and sustenance for his father on the journey. So he sent his brothers away, and they departed, and he said to them, do not quarrel on the journey. Then they went up from him in Egypt. They came to the land of Canaan to their father Jacob, and they told him, saying, Joseph is still alive, and indeed he is ruler over all the land in Egypt. But he was stunned, for he did not believe them. Well, he's believed for at least the last 10 years or so that he was dead. And now they say, well, no, he's not really dead. And by the way, he rules Egypt. And he's like, yeah, right. When they told him all the words of Joseph that he had spoken to them, and when he saw the wagons that Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of their father Jacob revived. You got to remember, a couple of chapters ago, when we were told about his belief that Joseph was dead, his spirit left him. Now, new life. That's potentially another messianic theme. The son that you thought had died is alive, and that brings you life. That's the story of Jesus. They told him all the words of Joseph. He was revived, it says. Then Israel said. Notice, he was Jacob at the beginning of this little record, and now it says, then Israel said. It is enough. My son Joseph is still alive. I will go and see him before I die. That's all I need. It's enough. I don't need all the story. I don't need all the stuff. I don't need all. It's enough that Joseph is alive. I wonder if the resurrection of the Lord is enough for people, or if they need more. So Israel set out with all that he had. He came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. Do you notice the first thing he does? The journey starts with what? Worship to God. God spoke to Israel in visions of the night and said, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, here I am. He said, I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make you a great nation there. I will go down with you to Egypt. Now, again, this is kind of important because the mindset about divinities actually at this time and long into the future was what? They were regional. And that you could leave and get outside of the impact in so much so that at times people took parts of their homeland with them. They took dirt from home with them. There's that one picture, what is it, in 2 Kings when Naaman the leper is healed? That's one of the things he wants to take back to his homeland with him when he's traveled to, can I take some dirt with me? As if he needs this little piece of Israel in order for the God of Israel to be able to be with him. Don't worry about it. You go ahead and go to Egypt. I'll be there too. I will surely bring you up again, and Joseph will close your eyes. You're going to see Joseph before you die. Then Jacob arose from Beersheba, and the sons of Israel carried their father Jacob and their little ones and their wives in the wagons which Pharaoh had sent to carry him. And they took their livestock and their property, which they had acquired in the land of Canaan, and came to Egypt. Now, they had been told they didn't have to do that, but they did it anyway. Jacob and all his descendants with him, his sons and his grandsons with him, his daughters and his granddaughters, and all his descendants he brought with him to Egypt. Now, these are the names of the sons. By the way, I kind of made that mention, and I didn't, I guess, make application of the point, so I need to go back and do that. Pharaoh said, you don't need to worry about all that stuff. Just go ahead and come. They packed all that stuff. Why?
Sure.
because they're not sure. That's exactly right. And again, here's the contrast. God makes a promise. We're not always sure. And it affects the way and the decisions we make. Right. And to carry this point just a little further, if we compare this, for instance, to David, David is the exact opposite picture, especially that scene where he goes and they're being taunted by the armies, and he says to Saul, I'll go fight Goliath. And they're like, well, you can't do that. You're doing Goliath. You know, he says, I'll do it. And they say, well, at least take my armor. And David walks around for a second, the armor, and says, I don't need this. God will be with me. God will deliver me. That they, the children of Israel, the king of Israel, the rulers in the army of Israel are all sitting there thinking, in order to face Goliath, you need this. And David says, I don't need any of that stuff if I have God. That's the opposite of this, which is, don't worry about this. You go ahead and come. I'll take care of you. Now, granted, we're dealing with Pharaoh here and not God in the circumstances. But the value of the story to us is to see that doubt that still lingered in their minds, so that they carried their stuff with them. They just didn't know if they could trust that promise. And I think that's where a lot of us fall with the promises of God. We think they're great and wonderful and they sound good, but we just don't quite trust them. So we do what? We try to take care of ourselves. He came to Egypt, in verse 6. They took their livestock, the property which they had acquired in the land of Canaan. They came to Egypt, Jacob and all his descendants with him, his sons and his grandsons with him, his daughters and his granddaughters, and all his descendants he brought with him to Egypt. Now, these are the names of the sons of Israel. Jacob and his sons who went to Egypt. Reuben, Jacob's firstborn, and the sons of Reuben, Hanok and Palu and Hezron and Carmi. And the sons of Simeon, Jemuel and Jamin and Ohad and Jachin and Zoar and Shual, the son of the Canaanite woman. And the sons of Levi, Gershon and Kohath and Merari. And the sons of Judah, and Onan and Shelah and Perez and Zerah. But and Onan died in the land of Canaan. We remember that story, right? We've already heard that part of the story. And the sons of Perez were Hezron and Hamuel. And the sons of Issachar, Tola, and Puvah, and Iab, and Shimron. And the sons of Zebulun, Sered, and Elon, and Jahaliel. And the sons of Leah, whom she bore to Jacob in Paddan Aram with his daughter Dinah. All his sons and daughters numbered 33. And of course, that's a lot. And the sons of Gad, Ziphion and Haggai, and Shunai, and Esbon, and Eri, and Ardai, and Areli, got to get that right. It's got to get the L in there. And the sons of Asher, Imnah, and Ishva, and Ishvi, and Beriah, and their sister Shurah, and the sons of Beriah, Heber, and Malchiel. And the sons of Ziphah, whom Laban gave to his daughter Leah, she bore to Jacob these 16 persons. And the sons of Jacob's wife Rachel, Joseph and Benjamin. Now, to Joseph in the land of Egypt were born Manasseh and Ephraim, whom Asenath, the daughter of Potipharah, the priest of On, bore to him. Now, this is important as well. Manasseh and Ephraim. These are the sons of Joseph. You'll recall there is no tribe of Joseph. There is what we refer to as the half-tribes of Manasseh and Ephraim. But we need to keep in mind that these two children are not all Hebrew. Their mother is Egyptian. And yet, them and their descendants are part of the nation of Israel and part of the people who became the Jews. So we have this mindset sometimes that there's some kind of really, really tight, closed off bloodline that didn't involve any other nations, but we're finding out more and more that there's all kind of other nations that were in here. And nobody ever questioned their place in the nation. In fact, we're going to see them receive a blessing in just a little while from Jacob. The sons of Benjamin, Bela, and Becher, and Ashbel, and Gera, and Naaman, and Ei, and Rosh, and Muppim, and Huppim. You gotta love these names. Muppim and Huppim. Man, I hope they were twins. Anyway, and Ard. These are the sons of Rachel who were born to Jacob. There were 14 persons in all. And the sons of, by the way, obviously we're talking about children and grandchildren when we get to these numbers. And this is not all Jacob's sons. It's Jacob's sons and his sons' sons. The daughters of Naphtali and, that's where I'm at. The sons of Dan is verse 23, Husham, and the sons of Naphtali, Jaziel and Gunai and Jezer and Shelium, and the sons of Bilhah, whom Laban gave to his daughter Rachel, and she bore these to Jacob. There were 7 persons in all, and all the persons belonging to Jacob who came to Egypt. And that's what we're getting here, is a numbering of the people that came. His direct descendants, not including the wives of Jacob's sons, were 66 persons in all. So we're not talking about the extended family, just the direct descendants, the children and the grandchildren. And the sons of Joseph who were born to him in Egypt were 2. All the persons of the house of Jacob who came to Egypt were 70. Why do we go through this big rehearsal? Because they start off with 70 and they leave a nation. And that is an important story as well. Even though 400 years of that time, they were in bondage and captivity, they started with 70 people and they left a nation of people. It's exactly part of what threatened Pharaoh. They were successful and they were multiplying and growing, and like all national leaders, that is scary when foreigners are multiplying and prospering, and you're afraid that means that we're going to get hurt and you're going to take over. And so that's all part of what's going on here. So let's see, where am I at? Verse 28. And I'm out of time. So if the Lord allows it, let's see, next Wednesday, this is the 17th, so that would be the 24th of January. We will pick up at chapter 46 and verse 28.
I have heard of a land on a faraway strand. In the Bible the story is told, where cares never come, never darkness nor gloom, and nothing shall ever grow old. In that beautiful land, on the faraway strand,